Hello and welcome to this new video. This time we're going to be discussing student-centered teaching. My name is Ricardo Romero. So before we begin to discuss what student-centered classes are, I think it would be very good if we remember what it looks like when you have a teacher-centered class. And I'm going to focus on the learners. So first of all, you'll find that these learners are relying all the time on what the teacher does. Second, they cannot make their own decisions most of the time about their learning. They do not know their own strengths and weaknesses. They don't know what they are good at or not. They do not connect the classroom learning with the real world, and in language teaching that is essential. They think that the teacher is wholly and completely responsible for their learning, and they don't know the best way to learn something. Additionally, they do not set learning goals, and therefore their motivation is limited in that sense because they see the grades as a motivating factor. And also they do not reflect on how well they are learning and the reasons why they are learning. So keeping those ideas in mind, one point of reference, my thermometer, when I know that a class is being too teacher-centered, is at the end of a class, you are tired. Your throat is sore, and it's difficult to keep up with the next class and the next class and the next class. That might be an indication that you are doing all the things in the class, therefore your classes are teacher-centered. So when you think about learner-centered education, it is basically believing in your students, trusting their students and their capacity. Charles Bonwell used to say, active learning involves students in doing things and thinking about the things that they are doing. And active learning promotes greater retention and transfer of knowledge. With those two quotations in mind, in this respect, I would like to share a very interesting piece of research created by the NTL, the Institute for Applied Behavior Science. And what they basically say is that the average student's retention rate based on what they do in the class changes. As you can see here in this graph, lecturing is only a 5%. Reading, so if you have them read, it's a 10%. But if you accompany that with audiovisuals like videos or pictures, etc., that adds up to 20%. If you give them a demonstration and they can do something with that, it's a 30%. If you produce a discussion in groups, then that accounts for 50% retention rate. And if you practice things by doing, for example, if you present a topic and then they have to create a dialogue or a conversation using what you taught them, that it's 75%. But if you allow them to teach others or to present to others or have an immediate use, that goes up to a 90% of retention. So when you're thinking about student-centered classes, keep those figures in mind. The fact that you're lecturing and you're saying things all the time in a beautiful way does not guarantee retention. What does it imply on the part of the teacher? It implies, of course, your knowledge of familiarity with the materials and the content of the program. It also requires giving up some of the roles that we think we can have, like introducing all the topics and motivating the students and presenting all the things and giving the explanations and then assessing everything they say. Think about those roles and how this new vision is going to question each one of the things that I have just mentioned. So what basically we're saying here is that as a teacher, you become a partner with the students, and that is the idea, that you accompany them with the learning process, you being the guide, but at some moments you also being the learner. Some drawbacks, and I totally understand that, it is that in our culture we were not educated to do that. So we were educated to follow the parents first and then the teachers and then the boss. So it's very difficult for us to really take full accountability on the things that we're supposed to be learning as students. That there are difficulties, and it is not easy just to move from a completely teacher-centered environment to a student-centered approach, because that will require a lot of things. One of the possible drawbacks mentioned is that some students experience difficulty as they are not always able to work independently to discover information. So a gradual thing would be necessary. And then some are not fully aware of their own learning processes and so cannot take full advantage of student-centered techniques, because if they are alone, they feel that they are not being paid attention. So it is essential that they realize that it's that experience alone or in pairs or in teams where they have to really take responsibility and understand what they are doing and what they are doing it for. So in terms of a teacher's roles, what will those be? The first thing that we need to learn is learn how to be quiet, not speak all the time, observe behavior, listen carefully and actively, and also take notes so that you know exactly when you need to give feedback to students. Okay. The other thing that is important is to let students set the pace from time to time. I know that in many institutions you have to cover the program, and in some cases you have to cover certain pages of a book. That is completely okay. But give yourself the possibility to allow students to say, you know what, we want more information here, we want to dedicate a few more minutes in this area, and so on. And also learn how to ask questions without taking over. In another video that I talked about correction techniques and feedback techniques, and one of the things that I said there is that whatever you do, it has to include some kind of reflection moment for the students. So instead of providing immediate answers, a good teacher in this setting would allow students to think about the answer, and the teacher should allow the time for that to happen. Next thing is to be present and active as participant, not as a chief. So you are one more member of the community. You participate, but think about your role not so much as the teacher, but somebody who is there prompting, facilitating, activating, etc., but don't take over. How do you know that you move from teacher-centered to student-centered? Very simple. Have a look at these points. If your learners are self-reliant, they believe in themselves, if they can make informed decisions about their learning, what to do, how to do it, if they can connect the classroom learning with the real world, then if they take responsibility for their own learning and also know about different strategies for learning, if they plan their learning and they set goals, and they are intrinsically motivated by making progress in learning, and when they reflect on their learning process and their own progress. So that's how you can tell. Finally, I want to tell you that age is not a limitation. This is something that we should begin to do with the little ones, and of course with the adolescents and younger adults and the adults. When people realize that they have control over the objectives, of the way they approach those objectives, on the way they can tell if they achieve that or not, believe me, you're going to have very successful learners. How learner-centered is your class? There are important things here to consider. So what I would like to suggest is a series of questions, and for each one of these questions, I'm going to ask you to please rate them from 0 to 10. If you are the person doing everything in the class, then you assign yourself a 10. And if it is something that students do, then you give yourself a 0. First category, planning the lesson. So again, if you are the person who does all the planning, that's a 10. If the students do it, that's a 0. 2, organizing the materials that are going to be covered. 3, presenting those materials in class. 4, checking comprehension. 5, providing feedback. 6, assessing performance. That is how well students do. So let's take, for example, the first case, in planning the lessons. We feel that it is our responsibility, and administratively, yes, it is. You have to do a lot of admin work in preparing this, but there is no reason why you cannot involve your students in doing that. So my first invitation is for you to find ways to involve your students. How do you do that? Simple surveys, for example, what of these topics, which one is more interesting? What order should we have? How should we approach this particular thing? The second thing is presenting the new information. So technically speaking, it is the teacher, the one that models the language. Therefore, it has to be you, the one presenting the content of the lesson. However, that is not necessarily true. There are many cases where students can take over. So for example, you say, okay, so we decided that these topics are more important for you. So who would like to present this one? And of course, you can talk to that person and provide them with all the things they need, but allow them to present. So presenting could be in a matter of 1 minute, one slide, any possible way so that they take control over presentations. There are studies that demonstrate that involvement on the part of students in the planning and the presentation allows for better attention because students love to see their peers presenting. Then, providing feedback. Who provides the feedback? Of course, we know that that is one of our roles and we take that seriously and we provide that feedback. But please also allow a little space for students to intervene. Peer correction is as important as teacher correction. So if a student takes the initiative and says, I don't think that's right, you can also train them on how to give that feedback. Instead of asserting or saying that is wrong, tell them to put that as a question. Excuse me, did you say that? Is this okay? Is that what you mean? And that produces incredible positive results. And then you continue with feedback and then in the assessment. Assessment of learning in the shape of tests, quiz, and other kinds of evaluations had to be done by the teacher. But assessment for learning is something that involves the teacher, the students in reflecting on what they are doing, and the peers in the classroom so that they can provide also with additional information. So now take a minute to go back to the survey that we did together and rate yourselves according to your situation. Please don't take this chart very seriously. It's just an indication of where you are in terms of student-centered teaching.